There is a specific kind of fear that settles in when you realize there is no one coming. Not encouragement, not capital, not protection, not rescue. No hidden safety net you forgot about. No invisible hand quietly steadying you from behind. Just the weight of your own circumstances pressing forward, indifferent to your effort or intent. When you have no money, no backing, no influential allies, and no room for error, something destabilizing happens at the identity level. You stop thinking about success as growth or fulfillment and start experiencing it as survival. Every delay feels dangerous. Every mistake feels permanent. And beneath all of it sits a quieter threat most people never name: the fear that without support, your value itself may be negligible, that the world will not notice your struggle unless you collapse publicly enough to justify attention. Most people never admit how early this fear begins shaping their behavior. It appears before strategy, before discipline, before ambition. It appears as hesitation disguised as realism, as lowered expectations framed as maturity, as the quiet decision to not want too much so disappointment hurts less. You tell yourself you're being practical, but watch closely and you'll notice how often practicality becomes a way to preempt humiliation. When you have no money, you are not just lacking resources. You are exposed to a particular kind of visibility where every action feels judged by outcomes you can't control. Failure isn't romantic here. It doesn't teach lessons in hindsight. It threatens identity in real time. This is where many people unconsciously retreat, not into laziness, but into safety behaviors that look responsible on the surface. You start explaining your limitations before anyone asks. You shrink your goals so they fit the resources you already have. You wait for conditions to improve as if conditions were listening. And slowly, without deciding to, you begin organizing your life around the avoidance of embarrassment rather than the pursuit of capacity. Machiavelli understood this long before modern language softened it. He observed that those without power are taught to internalize restraint, patience, and virtue, not because these qualities lead to strength, but because they make weakness easier to manage. When support is absent, the world does not encourage you to grow. It encourages you to adapt quietly. It rewards predictability. It rewards compliance with your own limits. And the most dangerous part is that this encouragement rarely feels external. It arrives as your own voice, your own reasoning, your own sense of realism. You think you are being honest with yourself, when in fact you are negotiating terms with fear. This is the first trap of succeeding with zero support. The belief that caution equals intelligence. It feels wise to move slowly when the margin for error is thin. It feels responsible to wait until you are ready. But readiness becomes a moving target when nothing external forces its arrival. And so the real danger isn't that you fail without support. The real danger is that you become psychologically aligned with a life small enough to never require it. Before we talk about discipline, leverage, or strategy, something more uncomfortable has to be confronted. How quickly the absence of support teaches you to manage yourself downward. And if that process goes unnoticed, everything that follows will be built on containment rather than expansion. The next layer of this problem is not about money at all, but about how environments condition behavior long before choice ever feels available. When support is absent long enough, it stops feeling like a temporary disadvantage and starts behaving like an environment. Not a circumstance you are inside, but a pressure that quietly reorganizes how you perceive risk, time, and yourself. You begin making decisions less on what is possible and more on what is survivable, and the shift is so gradual it rarely feels like a choice. The body learns first. It learns to scan for threat instead of opportunity, to calculate consequences before desire has fully formed, to hesitate not because action is impossible, but because exposure feels too costly. This is how scarcity becomes instructional. It teaches you what kinds of behavior are safe long before you consciously decide what kind of person you want to be. You notice it in how quickly you rule yourself out, how often you preemptively explain your position, how readily you accept limits that have never actually been tested. You tell yourself you are being disciplined, grounded, realistic. But realism, when shaped by prolonged lack of support, becomes something else entirely. It becomes a form of self-containment that masquerades as wisdom. The world does not need to stop you when you begin stopping yourself automatically. This is the deeper consequence of having no backing. Your internal thresholds lower. What once felt unacceptable begins to feel normal. What once felt temporary begins to feel permanent. And because nothing external is intervening, the adjustments feel self-authored, even when they are not. Machiavelli observed that power does not only rule through force, it rules by shaping expectations. Those without power learn to expect less not because they lack ambition, but because expectation itself becomes dangerous when unmet. Over time, you stop measuring your actions by potential and start measuring them by how little disruption they cause. You become careful with visibility, conservative with intention, strategic in a way that never risks open loss. From the outside, this looks like composure. From the inside, it feels like constant internal negotiation. The most dangerous part is that this conditioning does not announce itself as fear. It arrives as restraint, patience, humility, and control, traits that are praised, rewarded, and rarely questioned. But notice what they quietly replace. Spontaneity fades, experimentation narrows. Initiative feels heavier than it used to. You are not lazy, you are calibrated, and calibration works until it doesn't. It keeps you functional, contained, and unbroken, but it also keeps you operating below any threshold that would require support to appear. This is why succeeding with zero support is not simply about effort or resilience. It is about recognizing how quickly the absence of reinforcement teaches you to become someone who no longer expects reinforcement at all. And once that expectation disappears, something essential begins to erode, not motivation, not confidence, but the sense that life is allowed to meet you halfway. The next layer of this problem is not about discipline or mindset. It's about a subtle structural weakness in this conditioning, one that only reveals itself when the system is examined closely enough. The problem with conditioning that forms under scarcity is not that it is too strong, but that it depends on a very specific distortion of time. Everything it teaches you relies on anticipation rather than contact, on imagined outcomes replacing lived experience before anything has actually occurred. The system works by keeping you ahead of life, rehearsing loss before loss has arrived, calculating exposure before exposure has been demanded. This is why it feels intelligent. This is why it feels protective. But anticipation has a flaw that experience does not. Experience corrects. Anticipation cannot. Once the body has learned to preempt risk, it no longer waits for reality to confirm its assumptions. It acts as if confirmation is unnecessary. This is where the system becomes fragile, not because it is wrong, but because it must prevent one specific thing from happening in order to survive. Unplanned contact, not bold action, not confidence, not rebellion. Simply contact that arrives before calculation finishes organizing the response. Scarcity-trained perception cannot tolerate this kind of interruption, because contact produces evidence, and evidence introduces variance. One outcome that does not align with the prediction does not immediately collapse the structure. It is dismissed as an exception, but repetition threatens it, not because repetition is dangerous, but because patterns begin to compete with expectation. And expectation, once challenged by lived contradiction, loses its authority quietly. This is why the system expends so much energy redirecting you away from initiation. It reframes hesitation as wisdom. It reframes delay as prudence. It reframes non-engagement as discipline. Anything that keeps experience from arriving before interpretation is complete. Most people misunderstand this moment. They believe awareness alone should weaken the structure. It rarely does. Awareness often intensifies it. Once you can name the conditioning, the system adapts by becoming more vigilant. You begin monitoring yourself for signs of deviation. You watch your impulses. You audit your intentions. You manage your exposure carefully. The structure survives by converting insight into oversight. It does not rely on ignorance. It relies on timing. As long as anticipation gets there first, the system remains intact. And this is why effort has never worked the way you hoped. Not because you lack discipline, but because discipline arrives too late in the sequence. By the time intention appears, the body has already decided what is safe. The weakness is real, but it is not accessible through force, insight, or planning. It exists at the level of timing, not will. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because it explains why surviving with zero support eventually begins to feel like a closed system, efficient, stable, and quietly resistant to anything that would require support to exist at all. The final shift does not arrive as a breakthrough. There is no moment where scarcity disappears or support suddenly appears. What changes is quieter than that. The system does not shatter. It loses urgency. The constant internal calculation begins to feel unnecessary, not because the situation is safer, but because the effort of managing it no longer produces the relief it once did. The old reflexes still exist: the scanning, the tightening, the impulse to minimize exposure before something can go wrong, but they arrive late now. They no longer organize the moment in advance. And because of that, they lose their authority. This is what most people misunderstand about succeeding with no support. It is not about becoming tougher, more disciplined, or more resilient. Those are adaptations that belong to the same scarcity logic that created the problem. Machiavelli never confused survival with power. He understood that power emerges when reactions stop preceding events, when decisions stop being shaped by imagined consequences before contact with reality occurs. When scarcity governed you, life happened in advance. You rehearsed loss before it arrived. You optimized yourself to fit conditions that no longer needed to be negotiated so aggressively. And that optimization felt like wisdom. What changes here is not confidence, ambition, or courage. It is timing. Things begin to happen closer to when they actually occur, not hours or days earlier in your nervous system. The future stops pressing down on the present with the same weight. Support may still be absent, resources may still be limited, but the psychological compression loosens. The constant self-monitoring becomes inefficient. The system no longer gains enough relief from controlling every variable to justify the cost. This is why the ending feels flat. There is no victory narrative, no transformation arc, just a subtle reorientation where the pressure that once defined you no longer arrives first. You are not protected from hardship. You are no longer organized around it. And when that happens, scarcity loses the one advantage it relied on: your anticipation. Life stops shrinking in advance of itself. And from that point on, whatever happens, happens in real time, not before.